I think we are good to go. So I'm getting the cue from our friends over at Children with Diabetes that we're going to get started. So I'm going to start reading some of the introductions. So April and Laila, I'll say goodbye to you for just a few minutes so I can run through some of our formalities here. So good evening to everybody at home. I am so glad to be welcoming you this evening to our Masterpiece Product Theater. Sounds very official. And also anybody at home who's on camera, mute your microphones just in case we don't want you to sneeze. So my name is Kerri Sparling, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for almost 35 years, and I'm an author and a diabetes advocate. And I believe that sharing our personal stories about life with diabetes helps people feel supported in their own journey with diabetes. So I'm glad we're going to be doing a lot of that this evening. Over the last 6 years, I've had the honor of working with the Tandem team as one of their Tandem ambassadors, and I'm proud to be moderating this evening's discussion. A big thank you to Children with Diabetes for teaming up with Tandem Diabetes Care to share Mission Diabetes Control, presented by April Blackwell with special guest Laila England. So let's introduce April. April, I'm going to read her bio because it is impressive and it has a lot of words that I'm going to potentially stumble through. So bear with me for just a moment. April Blackwell is an aerospace engineer, has a goal of being a lifelong astronaut, and is someone living with type 1 diabetes who flies the International Space Station as a flight controller in mission control. That is awesome. April has been obsessed with space since kindergarten when she made up her mind to become an astronaut. A diagnosis of type 1 diabetes at age 11 seemed like an insurmountable roadblock, as type 1 diabetes is an automatic disqualification on the astronaut application. But instead of giving up, she doubled down, learning Russian in high school, studying hard in math, and receiving a full ride scholarship to attain an aerospace engineering degree. In her aerospace career, April has flown more than 250 hours in experimental Army aircraft and passed qualifications in the Army Special Operations Helicopter Dunker Program. I practiced that phrase several times, just for the record. The altitude chamber and parachute course, all of which normally preclude type 1 diabetes participants. She has acquired nearly 3,000 console hours in mission control and is responsible for maintaining the International Space Station's attitude. April has not given up on her ultimate dream of becoming an astronaut, but she has added an extra challenge to be the first person with type 1 diabetes in space. She is passionate about sharing her experiences to inspire fellow people with diabetes to push boundaries in pursuit of their dreams. So April will be joined this evening by 14-year-old Laila England, who shares April's dream to one day be an astronaut with type 1 diabetes. Laila has raised thousands of dollars to find a cure and better treatment so that she can break down the barriers that currently prevent her or anyone with diabetes from becoming an astronaut. So we're really excited to hear Laila's questions for April and to bring these two inspiring individuals together. We're also going to have time for a short Q&A at the end of our discussion, so please feel free to send your questions through the Zoom chat or through the Facebook discussion live chat so throughout the program so we can answer them at the end. So make sure that you are actively participating because we want to hear from you at home. All right, can I get that disclosure slide? There it is. Make sure you read all of it. So here is that disclosure slide. We want to make sure we made space to review it. Puns, there's only a couple, most of them are terrible, but just bear with me. So in official mode, on behalf of Tandem Diabetes Care, I would like to share that in this presentation, we may pass along suggestions, tips, or information about experiences or approaches to the management of diabetes. However, please note that individual symptoms, situations, circumstances, and results may vary. Please consult your physician or qualified healthcare provider regarding your condition and appropriate medical treatment. The information provided is not intended to be used for medical diagnosis or treatment or as a substitute for professional medical advice. Got it? Got it. April is compensated by Tandem Diabetes Care for her participation in this event. However, she has created the content for this presentation, and it is based on her personal experiences and observations. And now that I've read all of this, I would love for April to come on back so that we can see her face and get to meet her and hear her awesome presentation. And April, to say that I'm starstruck would be a wicked understatement. And another space pun, so you are welcome. So thanks for being here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your job as a flight controller and all that it entails. I'm going to disappear for just a bit while you do your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that great introduction, and I love all the puns, and I might have a couple more, so we can enjoy them all together. And I just want to introduce myself and give a warm welcome to everyone here. Like Kerri said, my name is April Blackwell, and I'm here to talk about two things we don't normally talk about together, which is STEM and space, as well as diabetes, and how they kind of fit together, how I've observed them to fit together in my life, and how I want to share that with you. So I've found myself in a unique position where my dream to become an astronaut has not historically fit with a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. And while I'm not an astronaut yet, big disclaimer here, I am not an astronaut. The challenges I've faced as a woman in a STEM field with jobs that require medical clearances has taught me that there's plenty of good that comes from living with type 1 diabetes. It forces us to cultivate these qualities that are applicable to almost any job, any facet of life. So today, in this unique setting where we get to kind of bring these two passions of mine together, STEM and diabetes advocacy, I want to talk about how living with T1D has given me an edge in life and made me the person, the engineer, and ultimately the flight controller I am today. And before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to Tandem Diabetes and Children with Diabetes for providing us this space, pun intended, to talk about what it really means to live with T1D every day. And before we go any further, I brought along a friend to show you. This is my Lego ISS. Hopefully there's some fellow Lego nerds out there. But just to give you a little idea of what I do at NASA, I do get to sit in mission control. Our group is one that does support 24/7, 365. So sometimes I am working while you're asleep. But basically, we make sure that the ISS continues to fly around the Earth nice and straight and level. Just like being on an airplane, you don't want your pilot doing any crazy barrel rolls. So we send commands up to the space station to make sure everything is in order. We also get a lot of help from Isaac Newton. So it's a really fun job, and I can't wait to tell you a little more about it. So I included this slide because I quickly learned upon arriving at NASA that I was entering an agency of history. If you know anything about NASA, you know they love their history, and they have some pretty cool history to be proud of. There's pictures from the moon landing days still in the hallways, and even the flight control rooms where we sit today is just one floor below the flight control room where men landed Neil and Buzz on the moon. And it's perfectly preserved, just one floor up. It's a really neat place to visit. I started to see this pattern, this plaque with the foundations of flight operations kind of showed up everywhere. It was in every conference room, on the door to every flight control room at the Johnson Space Center. And I sort of just was, curious about it. Why was this such a big part of our culture? And I started to understand that these foundations were more than just words. I started hearing them in almost every conversation, every debrief, every what if scenario, and NASA is big on backup plans, as you probably know. But there was something so familiar about these qualities. One day I was packing up my bag with all my backup supplies, my backup blood sugar meter and an insulin pen, refilling my glucose tablets, and I had this light bulb moment that these qualities, the foundations of flight operations, perfectly describe the requirements of a life with type 1 diabetes. So I thought it would be neat to take a look at these qualities a little closer and make some parallels between being a person with T1D or taking care of one, if you're a caregiver out there, and controlling the International Space Station. So let's do it. You have to forgive my terrible Photoshop skills, which are actually in PowerPoint. I am an engineer, and my graphic design skills are probably a little bit less than your average graphic designer. So we'll stumble through this together, but it might make you laugh anyway. So I hope you enjoy these gorgeous depictions that I have for you. We'll start with the first quality, which is discipline. Being able to follow as well as to lead, knowing that we must master ourselves before we can master our task. So most people don't find themselves at NASA without having some amount of discipline. We're all dedicated to the mission, and ultimately we're dedicated to exploration, something bigger than ourselves. We learn discipline early. Even though I showed up to NASA with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering and a master's degree in aeronautical science, I still had to complete a 2-year training process before I was allowed to sit solo and control the space station by myself. During that 2-year training process, it was more than just learning technical data and equations. It was also this discipline, mastering myself, working on these qualities we're talking about in the context of flight control, learning how to communicate with my teammates and to be part of a team, learning when it was my turn to lead and when it was my turn to listen and support. Does this sound familiar? I think it might for a lot of us. In this case, as people living with type 1 diabetes, discipline means more about mastering ourselves before we can master our disease. So I wanted to share a little story about my dad. My dad is a person who is deathly afraid of needles and anything that is going to poke him. And so living with diabetes was kind of a wake-up call for him. And taking care of someone with diabetes, definitely a huge wake-up call. So we went on a trip, and this was only a couple years after I was diagnosed as a family. And me and my dad kind of did our own thing one day, went to a different little town. And back in those days, before CGMs, I just had a manual blood glucose meter. Somehow, on that 30-minute trip to this little town, I had forgotten my lancing device. So what I had at my disposal was a meter, test strips, and just the lancets themselves, not actually the lancing device. So I asked my dad, I was probably around 13 or so. I asked him if he could just manually poke my finger for me so that I could get the blood out to do the test. And he tried really hard, and he just couldn't quite get the gumption up to do it. So in that moment, I had to have discipline because I was the one responsible for my diabetes. So there I was in, this little town, and I had to just manually poke my finger with a lancet, no lancing device. And it was scary, but it was one of those moments where you're like, yeah, I can do this. I can, I have the discipline to master myself and this disease. I'm sure a lot of you have your own similar stories of discipline, perhaps stopping an activity to change a site or eat some gummy bears, or getting an extra pat down going through the airport. This is how diabetes bakes in discipline. All right, competence. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is from the cupola on the International Space Station, one of the astronauts' favorite places to look out the window and see Earth. For competence, it is described by NASA as there being no substitute for total preparation and complete dedication, for flight will not tolerate the careless or indifferent. At NASA, competence, which is total preparation and complete dedication, is just the baseline. The machines we work with are incredibly complex and often 20 plus years old. Just think of what a computer looked like 20 years ago. That's what we're using on the International Space Station because many of the pieces were launched 2 decades ago. So our challenge as flight controllers is to understand how all the systems work together, what resources we have for troubleshooting or fixing problems, and how we can reconfigure equipment that's already on board in space to meet the new science, research, and orbital goals of the 21st century. Competence is an important tool in our toolbox as flight controllers. We know that without that baseline, we're risking the safety of the crew, the vehicle, and the mission, because space is an unforgiving environment. So competence in the context of diabetes means there being no substitute for total preparation and complete dedication, for diabetes will not tolerate the careless or indifferent. Just like the space environment, diabetes doesn't care if you're ready for what it has to throw at you or not. Life with D&D means a baseline of technical competence, and you all have that. While it's not quite rocket science, trust me, I've been more perplexed about diabetes-related things than rocket things. Diabetes doesn't play by pleasant physics or formulas. We can try to assign correction factors and insulin sensitivity numbers and carb ratios, But those equations require constant recalibration and seemingly endless extra variables. I once tried to explain to someone why it took me so long to get ready just to go on a run, to go exercise. I had to explain that I have to eat enough carbs to have my blood sugar up at a certain level, but then I have to wait until most of the insulin is not peaking in my body anymore because that causes me to go low. I have to set my pump in exercise mode and think about how long I want to run, potentially eat some more quick sugar for a little boost before I go on my run so I don't just go low immediately. And then I have to bring fast acting sugar with me on the run. When I come home, I kind of have to do all those steps in reverse. I have to turn off exercise mode. I might have to eat some quick sugar to bring me up if I went low. And if my body happened to go a little bit high, I then need to correct and come back into range. So that's complicated enough. But then if I'm stressed or tired or dehydrated or basically anything off nominal is what we call it at NASA, that whole process can be affected. It's a lot to think about, and it's me who has to think about it because diabetes will not tolerate the careless or indifferent. Confidence, believing in ourselves as well as others, knowing that we must master fear and hesitation before we can succeed. This might sound like a strange quality to hone as a flight controller, but confidence is actually really, really important. Being able to recover from a mistake or keep an open mind to consider someone else's perspective is critical. Our call-in requirements are 2 hours. So that means if something happens on ISS in the middle of the night, and you're sitting there and you need some help and you call in your friend who's on call, they have 2 hours per our regulations to get there. And a lot can happen in 2 hours, as you probably know. When you're first certified, it's your performance in these 2 hours that can really make or break you because something bad or off nominal is happening on ISS and you're the only person in mission control room that has the in-depth knowledge about your own system. The flight director, who is kind of the head of the whole operation, they lead the teams in all of the mission control centers and make the final decisions about what's going to happen. They're counting on you to present all the options and make a sound recommendation. So how does that translate to life with T1D? So I kept this one the same because I think confidence in context of T1D is actually really similar. We're experts at mastering fear. Needles, shots, complications, all of those things, all of those terms are inherently scary. And we face those aspects of the disease every single day. But I challenge you to take the confidence diabetes has taught you and go beyond just these physics of managing the disease. So what do I mean by that? So my job at NASA is the type of job that requires a medical clearance. There's a handful of jobs like this. Think of things like firefighter, astronaut, pilot, any jobs that require sort of intense physical labor, heavy lifting. The reason my job requires this medical clearance is pretty clear. I need to be healthy and fit in order to keep the crew and vehicle safe at a moment's notice. Anything can happen at any time. Luckily, my NASA doctor is awesome. She's really warm and friendly. And even though she normally sees humans in absolutely peak physical condition, like astronauts, she loves to learn about the technology I use to manage my T1D. So last year, I was able to show her all the new algorithms built into my t:slim X2 insulin pump with Control-IQ technology. I showed her how the readings from my CGM could influence how much insulin the pump delivered completely automatically. I used my confidence gained from decades of disease management, which probably you all have some level of that, coupled with my confidence in the technology I use to teach someone, a doctor of all people, how this whole package is enabling me to perform my dream job. So I challenge you to use your confidence and teach someone about your life with T1D. Responsibility. I love this picture. It's actually from the Apollo 11 mission control room that's preserved at the Johnson Space Center. And it looks a lot different than our control center today. So it's a good reminder of sort of where we came from and where we're going. And responsibility as part of the foundations of flight operations means realizing that it cannot be shifted to others, for it belongs to each of us. We must answer for what we do or fail to do. It's no secret that as flight controllers, we understand our job performance can have serious consequences. We're tasked to maintain a 20-plus-year-old International Space Station with at least 3, usually 6+ humans living on board. We actually have 7 on board right now. We understand and accept that responsibility every time we show up for a shift, every time we walk through the door into the flight control room. The safety of the crew, the safety of the vehicle is our responsibility, and it can't be shifted to others. So diabetes is so similar. We have the same responsibility. It can't be shifted to others. It belongs to us. We must answer for what we do or fail to do. Let's not sugarcoat things. As people with TUND, ultimately we or our support team are responsible for our disease management. I know more than once I have had to explain to my endocrinologist about what I've done or failed to do. I've definitely forgotten a bolus before. Even though the responsibility of blood sugar checks and insulin dosing and carb counting wasn't something we chose, practicing the dedication and focus diabetes requires embeds responsibility in our personal toolbox. We know the consequences, and we know how to work hard to be responsible. Toughness. Taking a stand when we must and to try again and again, even if it means following a more difficult path. This is actually probably my favorite quality in the foundations of flight operations, because it kind of affects all the others. And an interesting story about toughness is it was actually added along with another quality, competence, to the original five words following the Apollo 1 fire. So if you don't know Apollo 1, you can do some Googling later. Basically, there were 3 astronauts on the launch pad performing a dress rehearsal for launch, and a fire started inside the spacecraft. Unfortunately, all 3 astronauts perished. The flight director at the time, who was Gene Kranz, he also was sort of made famous by the Apollo 13 movie and actually just lives down the street from me. But he was the flight director at the time, and he gave a somber speech to all the flight controllers. He asked them to go back to their offices and write tough and competent on their blackboards as a reminder that space and the pursuit of space is unforgiving. To forge ahead, we have to be tough. And I think this one most closely matches what I feel about diabetes, and what diabetes has ingrained in me is this toughness, taking a stand when we must, trying again and again and sometimes again, even if it means following a more difficult path. Being responsible and disciplined and competent requires toughness. We're all tough. We often have to learn how to incorporate new technology or set up a trend line that allows us to exercise, or just bolusing for a piece of pizza from a restaurant we haven't eaten at before. And honestly, as I'm sure you know, those trials are not always an easy success. Sometimes they require trying again and again and again. Sometimes they require extra blood sugar checks or a perfectly timed snack, or in other words, a more difficult path. Toughness is, in my opinion, one of the most important life qualities in general. More than once, I've had to give myself a little toughness pep talk, and it usually sounds something like, if I can perform the job of a vital organ and give myself thousands of injections and count carbs almost without thinking, then I can do anything, fill in the blank. So use that toughness that diabetes requires to your advantage. Teamwork. Oh, wow, teamwork. ISS is a huge exercise in teamwork. At NASA, it means respecting and using the abilities of others, realizing that we work toward a common goal, for success depends upon the efforts of all. ISS is controlled by literally an international team. We have control centers in Houston, Huntsville, Alabama, Canada, where they control the robotic arm, Russia, where half the space station is actually Russian, Japan has a module, so they also have a mission control, and Germany, the European Space Agency, has a module, so there's a mission control in Germany as well. We all work together on this common goal, even with many cultural and ideological differences. In fact, the system I'm responsible for, the ISS motion control system, is really split between two segments, is what we call it on ISS. Half of it is actually on the Russian side. They have all of the thrusters. And on the US side, we actually have these huge gyroscopes, which control the space station most of the time. So when I'm in mission control, I talk to my colleagues in Russia all the time. We have an interpreter, so you don't have to know Russian, but it does sort of take this technical teamwork idea to a whole new level to make all the systems on board ISS work together seamlessly. What does teamwork mean in the context of T1D? I think this is actually a really critical piece of living with T1D, because it's important to recognize that living with T1D is a team effort. I can think of so many pieces of the team: parents, spouses, friends, doctors, nurses, nutritionists, diabetes educators, teachers. I'm sure I'm missing some, but all of these people work together, and that is what makes successful diabetes management. It's the efforts of all of these people together. So it's here that I kind of wanted to mention a group of people who I never suspected would play such a pivotal role in my life, and especially the part of my life that included T1D. So as Kerri mentioned, my first job out of college was actually not at NASA. It was with a contractor with the US Army. And I showed up as the only girl in a mixed group of military and civilians, test pilots and engineers. My job was to fly on experimental Army helicopters and test new systems. And in order to do that, I had to get an FAA medical clearance, similar to if you want to learn how to be a private pilot. So this whole process, I had no idea, but it was going to take me nearly 6 months of back and forth letters with the FAA before I was finally granted my clearance to fly on board the helicopters. And all of these test pilots and engineers just rallied around me. They were my champions and kept encouraging me the whole time. In fact, after I had my clearance, they signed me up for all sorts of fun adventures, like flying aerobatics in our chase plane, going to the helicopter dunker trainer at the Special Operations Center, doing a run in an altitude chamber, and even flying on a specially equipped Saab aircraft at the famous Navy Test Pilot School. All of these activities required them to champion for me to the medical staff at each location, and ultimately their voices held a lot of weight. I got to do all of these activities, even as a T1D. All right, our last discussion point is vigilance, being always attentive to the dangers of flight, never accepting success as a substitute for rigor in everything we do. This is the last quality we'll discuss, and as you probably know, NASA doesn't have a perfect record. There have been accidents. At the end of the day, spaceflight is a dangerous activity, but vigilance can help mitigate this risk. As the saying goes, we can't accept success as a substitute for rigor. You can probably see where this is going. So vigilance with diabetes means being always attentive to the dangers of diabetes, never accepting success as a substitute for rigor in everything we do. Life with T1D requires constant vigilance. No days off, I'm right there with you. And we know successfully bolusing for a piece of pizza on Monday does not guarantee that the same piece of pizza on Thursday will have the same result. We have to be rigorous because diabetes can be dangerous. Thankfully, we now have extra tools that can be an extra set of eyes, alerting us to high or low trends, and ultimately help us maintain more vigilance. But that doesn't mean we can just sit back and relax all the time. Technology cannot be a substitute for rigor in our disease management. But diabetes has already taught you that. It's taught you all of these things: discipline, competence, confidence, responsibility, toughness, teamwork, and vigilance. So whether you're ready to admit it or not, diabetes has helped make you the incredible person you are today. These qualities are in your DNA because you manage this disease day in and day out. I like sharing this picture of myself, even though it sort of exposes how nerdy I was even at a young age. This was a picture of me in October 1998. This was around Halloween, obviously, with the pumpkins. But it turns out this picture was taken just 2 months before I was diagnosed with T1D. In the picture, obviously, I'm excited to go trick-or-treating in my favorite astronaut jumpsuit. And at this point, there's nothing standing between me and my dream except time, experience, hard work, and luck. Dealing with diabetes has never been easy for me or come naturally. I don't know that it does for many people, but it definitely didn't for me. And it took time to gain the courage to face it head on and just deal with it. But now I know it's still just time, experience, hard work, and luck between here and my ultimate dream. But now, of course, that dream has a new layer: to be the first T1D astronaut. With the qualities that this disease bakes in just by managing it every day, I know there's no limit to my dreams or any of our collective dreams and achievements in the T1D community. Thank you guys for letting me share all my heart and soul about diabetes and STEM.
So I loved that. And there were so many parts of that that I love, but there were a couple that stood out. I love the idea of a toughness pep talk so very much. That's so good. And then the idea of you controlling the space station and doing the job of your pancreas at the same time is like next level multitasking that I can't even conceptualize. But I have to be completely honest, your Photoshop skills are so good. Those slides were amazing. So especially when the portal turned into the infusion set, I was like, that's the one. That one's my favorite. So it's so good. So thank you for all of that. And everyone at home, thank you for all the questions that you've been sending in and for paying such rapt attention. I really appreciate that. And so before we bring on Laila England, I wanted to read her bio very quickly so that you can get to know her, and then she'll jump on and she's going to have some questions for April. And so let's see. Laila was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes shortly after her 3rd birthday, and she has an identical twin, Sonia, and 2 younger sisters, so the adventures never stop over there. Laila's interest in the space program launched when she completed a 5th grade report on Mae Jemison, the first African-American woman in space. And her love for space reached new heights after attending a week-long space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. Laila dreams of being an astronaut and showing the world that people with type 1 diabetes are capable of reaching the stars. She is also passionate about raising awareness for early diagnosis of diabetes, educating people on what it's like to live with diabetes, and raising money for a cure. Laila, can we get you to turn your camera on and join us here? Hi.
Hi.
Awesome. Thank you for coming tonight. And just as a quick aside, I heard that you raised $30,000 in the past 2 years. That's very impressive. So we applaud you for your efforts. We can't wait to see where your journey takes you. But really quickly, before you have your questions for April, it's very rare, even on a Zoom meeting, they get to hang out with fellow Tandem pumpers. So I was hoping we could just get a little like, show me your pump sort of moment here. Yeah, very nice. Excellent. Well done. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to disappear. Laila, you're in charge. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Kerri. Hi, April. I'm so excited to meet you.
I'm so excited to meet you too. I feel like I know you because I feel like we're the same person, or just like a few years apart.
Yeah. So my first question is, what obstacles related to T1D have you had to overcome to get to where you are in your career?
Great question. So I kind of touched on it a little bit. I think the biggest obstacle I've had to overcome is sort of building up my confidence in order to meet some of these obstacles head on. And the FAA, getting through the FAA process was a big hurdle for me that, it took a lot of time, and it was sort of this uncharted territory for me. And it's funny because I actually wrote some about it on my blog back in the day. And I had some people email me about it, how are you getting through it? What kind of information are you sending in? And it was so cool because, like, a full circle moment, I had virtually met this person, Cody, through email, and he was also trying to get an FAA medical. And now I moved here to Houston, and he works here at NASA. And so it's like this whole cool thing. So I think, facing obstacles head on, having that confidence, and then realizing that you can learn something from every experience that's put in front of you.
That's great. Well, I hope I get to come for full circle and meet you in person.
Me too. I can't wait till we meet in person.
Yeah. So have you had any scary moments, diabetic moments on your path to where you are now in your job?
Luckily, I have not had any scary moments with diabetes. And I think part of why is because it's something that's always in the back of my mind, especially like wanting to be an astronaut, as you know. Even without diabetes, you need to be in like really great physical condition. You need to be at the top of your game in whatever field you're in. And so kind of having that bit stuck in my head that I wanted to be an astronaut, I think has sort of, been a common thread throughout my diabetes management. So luckily, knock on wood, I haven't had any scary moments.
Well done. That's really impressive. So what needs to happen to get a T1D cleared to go into space?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this one a lot lately, actually. So T1Ds in space, I think the biggest problem right now is there's just not really been any testing on the disease itself, the devices we use, the medicine we use. Our population, of course, is pretty small, and right now NASA has the power, so to speak, to choose people who are in superhuman physical condition, right? And so I think there just hasn't really been that need yet to explore what it would take to get a T1D into space. But I think that's really just it, understanding how our bodies would react, how we could still deliver medication, how our technology might work in the space environment or the spacecraft environment, and getting all those data points together so that we can fly in space.
Well, I hope people like you and I are the ones to create the demand to explore.
Exactly.
So my family encourages and facilitates my dreams to be an astronaut. Mae Jemison was my inspiration for becoming an astronaut. Are there people in your life that were inspirational and encouraged you to pursue this career?
I'm so glad you mentioned Mae Jemison. She's just, she's awesome. Almost every astronaut, has something awesome about them. I think for me, there's kind of like three main people, maybe groups of people, I guess. So the first one has been my parents. They've never said no, or like, hey, maybe you should think about something else, or do you really want to keep pursuing astronaut because you have diabetes, it might be kind of hard. They've never said anything like that. They always encouraged me to just go after my passion, and I would encourage anyone out there to do the same thing, because you only have this one life, so do what you're passionate about. That's what's going to make it feel awesome. So thank you, Mom and Dad. Shout out to you guys out there. The other person that I can think of sort of on the diabetes sphere, I really didn't know anyone with diabetes growing up, and I happened to find Kerri's blog, which is probably a similar story to a lot of T1Ds out there. And just reading her words kind of gave me encouragement when I, had hard times and stuff in college and stuff. I struggled with my disease management. And so it was, I don't know, just like a warm hug reading all the things she was experiencing. So she was kind of my diabetes mentor, I feel like, even if we didn't know each other super well. And then the last person, sort of in the space side of things, I would say is the astronaut Eileen Collins. And I challenge everyone to go look her up because she's really amazing lady. But I remember as a kid, this is super nerdy, but I used to love babysitting my neighbors' kids because they had this cable package that included the NASA channel. So I could put their kid to bed and then I would get to watch the NASA channel. And we didn't have it at my house and we didn't really have the internet back then. But we went on a vacation where we stayed in a hotel that happened to have the NASA channel. And it happened to be Eileen Collins' first flight as commander, the first woman commander. And I remember watching the launch, and I remember during the launch, one of the engines had a problem. And I mean, she was just cool as a cucumber through the whole experience. And I wanted to be that person because at that point, it absolutely didn't matter that she was a woman. She was the right person for that job. So I think that inspired me to, kind of set those sometimes barriers aside of being a woman or having T1D and just be the best version of yourself you can be.
Well, that sounds like I really need to come full circle with Kerri too. Probably watch Eileen's launch. That sounds so cool.
Yes, she's cool.
So what do you think could increase my chances of becoming an astronaut? Like, what kind of things could I do in junior high and high school to prepare for what you're doing now as a student and as a diabetic?
Yeah, I encourage everyone, like I said before, to follow your passion. So for me, that was math and science. That kind of led to engineering. But as far as sort of other things, astronauts are actually super well-rounded individuals. They do crazy things. Like I know some that are really into rock climbing and go rock climbing a lot, or they fix old cars, or they love going scuba diving. Some of them are amazing musicians or artists. And so I think, finding your passion in those sort of extracurriculars and always looking for a challenge, seeking a challenge, never saying, no, I can't do that because I have diabetes or because that sounds hard. Like just face it head on and see it as something that you can learn from.
That is such great advice. Thank you. As a woman, are there things you feel you had to do differently to reach your level of success?
Absolutely. I don't want to hold back that, it's been a perfectly paved road in front of me. There's definitely been challenges. And I think as a woman in a STEM field, you sort of have to have even more technical competence in order to overcome, whatever preconceptions people have about you. And just kind of that toughness, like having a thick skin, because you're going to hear things that aren't pleasant. And I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but I've experienced it several places that I've worked and even during college. So, you have to have a thick skin. And I think having that baseline of a super passionate about what you're doing is going to help motivate you through any hard times or obstacles that you overcome. Another tip I have is to always have a mentor, and it can be anyone, but I've also always had a woman mentor. Recently, it's been someone who's also a mom, because that's sort of a new thing in my life. And so just having another woman to be able to talk to and help you navigate some of these paths that feel a little bit foreign to us as women has been so helpful. So I challenge anyone out there to get a mentor because they're really great.
That's amazing. Really. Have there been any studies taken place on the effects weightlessness has on blood glucose levels or synthetic insulin?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I actually did a little research on this one. So I don't know of any research being done on synthetic insulin or even really diabetes devices. But of course, we do have decades of human spaceflight experience, and all of those astronauts were kind of their own test subjects, if you will. We take lots of body samples from them all the time. And some of that research has shown that astronauts actually have some similar symptoms to people with diabetes. So they have increased insulin resistance while they're in orbit. They can have sort of like a glucose intolerance and stuff. So some of those studies are really interesting, and I think it might help us shape what it would mean for a long-term stay in space for a T1D. I'm not a medical expert, so I don't know exactly how those all translate, but I think it's interesting that the doctors are looking at stuff like that, because there could be lessons learned both ways, right? Maybe they can reach out to the diabetes community to understand mitigations to help astronauts in space now. So it could be really neat.
That is so amazing. That's really cool that they're looking into that.
Yeah.
What is the most awe-inspiring thing you've seen in your position or on your pathway to this position?
I love this question because I definitely have something, and it's actually not like just one moment, but every time I'm on console, I love to bring people to mission control and let them see what their tax dollars are paying for. It's an incredible place, and you definitely feel like you're being transported to someplace special as soon as you walk through the door. For me, I am terrible at geography, but I love looking at the Earth. I think it's just the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And so while we're on console, we have these beautiful camera views from ISS that are always looking down on the Earth. We have this, we call it the 6-pack. It's 6 camera views from Earth. And I love looking at those views. It's so funny because actually where mission control is, it's in this huge like 1960s concrete building, and it's in the very middle of the building both ways. So there's no windows. There's no way to have a window there. So we actually call it the windowless room with the best view in the world, because it's just absolutely incredible. And every time I see it, I just look and stare for a few minutes, because not everyone gets to see that. So I think it's really cool that we get to experience that view, even if we're still here on Earth.
Well, I'm definitely going to shoot to be in that windowless room sometime. It sounds so cool.
Come on down.
What is one memory you will never forget that helped you get where you are?
Yeah, I don't have one memory that really sticks out with me. I think, making sure that my path continued, that I kept having this forward momentum, was just that feeling of always saying yes, and not like sort of artificially holding yourself back because you're scared, or you don't have the confidence, or you're not sure how your diabetes is going to react, or how the doctors are going to react to it. The altitude chamber was an interesting one because our diabetes equipment is not rated to be in an altitude chamber. So I had to sort of come up with this plan of how I was going to do our pre-breathe with everything on, and then I was going to unhook my pump and leave it out of the chamber during the actual run, and how I was going to make sure that I still was okay, even though I was like, the whole purpose of an altitude chamber is to test your reaction to lack of oxygen, and what those symptoms look like for you, so that you can recognize them when they're happening in real life. And so I think just going head on into all of those challenges benefited me, it personally helped me grow, because I definitely was scared for some of those things. But just having that sort of like yes attitude is, I think, really what got me to where I am today.
That is so incredible that you get to do those kinds of things. That sounds awesome. So you probably get asked this a lot, but do you believe there could be life on other planets?
I do get asked this a lot, actually. I am, for better or worse, kind of logic-minded, similar to the Vulcans, if anyone out there is a Star Trek fan. And so I think it would be harder to believe that there's not other places with life, but, I think we have a long ways to go scientifically until we can prove any of that.
That's pretty cool. What kind of precautions are in place for astronauts to keep safe from COVID?
Lots of mitigations, actually. We, of course, our astronauts are a huge resource for us at NASA. They're indispensable. It's hard to train them, and it's hard to pick these people. It takes years and years. So we really try to protect them. Of course, they always wear masks. We follow the guidance of the federal government. So, that means we've been wearing masks lately. They have to be certain kinds of masks, and the astronauts go under, they get tested for COVID a lot. And then, of course, before they actually launch, they're in a quarantine situation for a few weeks. And my understanding is it's been expanded a little bit because of COVID. So that means that like families can't always go to the launches and stuff like that during this. So there's a lot of resources being dedicated to keeping astronauts safe and making sure that COVID doesn't find its way up to the International Space Station.
It's nice to know that the astronauts are being kept safe. That's pretty cool.
Definitely, yeah.
Are there any specific reasons that are keeping people with diabetes from going to space?
I wouldn't say any specific. I think it's just sort of this lack of knowledge, this knowledge gap that we need to fill with testing and understanding more about what types of technology we can use on board spacecraft and how it's going to react in a weightless environment. So once we fill out that knowledge gap, I'm pretty confident we'll see, maybe our first type 1 astronaut.
Well, sign me up to help fill in the gap.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Is this job one that works out with being a mother?
Absolutely. I will say that I have an incredible partner, my husband, Chris, who also works at NASA, but we have a sort of combined calendar and we try to keep things organized that way. And then, we just try to really carve out time to be disconnected from our jobs and be with our kids. And, we call ourselves Team Blackwell, and we do a lot of fun things together as a family. So our kids are still pretty young. They're just 3 and 5. So, I think it's fun to include them in some of our work things. They do know what ISS is. We go outside and watch it go over in the night sky together sometimes. And it's really fun to hear them say, hey, that's mommy's spaceship. So yeah, absolutely can work out being a mom.
Well, I bet that you are the coolest mother in the world.
I don't know about that, but I guess you'll have to ask my kids someday.
Yeah. So those are all my questions.
All right. Well, maybe Kerri will show back up. There she is.
Yay,
Sorry, I was
Kerri.
on mute. I get to recrash in because we do have some questions that came in. But April, really quickly, I was looking at your Instagram earlier, which is at Nerdy April, and it's not really a question technically, but why did you ask whether or not people would want to go on a spacewalk or work on the space toilet? Like, what is it about the space toilet? I feel like I would want the space toilet. Is that the wrong answer?
No, absolutely not. Like, 'cause, a spacewalk is actually pretty dangerous because you're kind of just in your own little personal spacecraft. So, maybe you just want to be the handyman and fix the toilet.
The space toilet does not sound very safe either. So I'm just going to throw that out there as a thing. And I also wanted to thank you for the really nice shout out about old school blogging and that sort of stuff. So thank you for that. But we do have some questions that have come in. So if you guys are both prepared to answer a couple of questions, I'd like to kind of throw one out there. And it's about like the mental state around diabetes. And for both of you, whoever wants to answer first, does having diabetes affect your mindset ever positively or negatively? And how do you kind of work with that?
Go for it, Layla. Lila, I'm sorry.
You're
I
good.
read your name and then I don't process the word right.
I wrote it down. It's on my computer just so I wouldn't forget. But yeah, Lila, take a crack at it.
Well, I think that it puts me into a more positive mindset. I think that I am in fact a much better person because of my diabetes, and growing up with it. I was 3 when I was diagnosed. So this mindset is one that I've grown up with, I'm accustomed to, And I think that like it's pretty good. I like it. I like my mind.
And April, how about you?
April?
My mindset has definitely changed over the years. I definitely had a few years where I struggled with the diagnosis. I was diagnosed at 11, so I do remember like before diabetes, life was this way. But I think I have to applaud all of the technology, because for me that has been like a huge quality of life saver, and being able to put some parts of my diabetes management on autopilot has just given me back so much time to hang out with my kids and do things I want to do.
Well, you kind of teed up my next question that's coming from the chat, because it was about technology. And we had more than one person ask what kind of pump you use. That could apply to any of us. So who would like to answer that one?
Well, I use a T-Slim.
It just appeared out of nowhere.
My pump.
And April, same for you, yeah?
Same for me, at least the last, I think, 5 years or so. I've been pumping for almost 20 years now, so I've gone through several iterations with different companies, and I'm thankful for the technology we have today.
Yeah, that was actually part of that same question. So how has wearing the T-Slim X2 insulin pump benefited you personally?
Yeah, for me anyway, I think that it's a really great tool to have. Just yesterday, actually, I was in a simulation. We're getting ready to launch some new astronauts to ISS this October. And so we were practicing, them coming up and docking to ISS. And I had like a crazy malfunction that my instructor put in. And it took me almost 4 hours to sort of get everything back to normal. And I sat down for a moment when I had a moment, and I was like, oh, I have not gone to the bathroom, eaten, or looked at my pump in the last 4 hours. And I looked at it and I was like a perfect 93. So having that like little peace of mind it's just priceless for me.
That's awesome. Laila, did you want to add anything to that, or
Well,
no pressure to?
I think that the basal IQ on the T-Slim pump has been a game changer for me. I've been able to take more tests in school because my blood sugar is more and more in range. My A1C has lowered, and that's amazing. And my parents have gotten more sleep than in the last 11 years. So I am so thankful for the T-Slim and the basal IQ.
I almost wish my daughter had heard you say that, because you sounded so delighted at taking more tests at school. I'm like, kids, get in here. Listen to what she said. It's a bonus. Take more tests. Well done, you. And I have actually another one that's come in from the chat. This would be, okay, so this would be for people who are newly diagnosed with diabetes. April, we'll start with you. What advice would you have for somebody who's just kind of starting this new journey with type 1?
Sure. So I think just being true to yourself, don't let that diagnosis sort of derail your dreams. I actually have a friend who's an astronaut, Anne McLean. I even wrote down what she said because I thought this might be important during this chat. But she says, be unrealistic about your dreams, be realistic about your path. So I think that's really important, and for anyone, but especially if you have T1D, just don't let it derail your dreams.
I love that. Can you send that to me? Because I would like to write that down.
That's an amazing quote. I like that. I want to write that down.
How about, sorry to make you follow that, Laila, but how about for you? Any advice for someone who's newly diagnosed?
Well, diabetes has lots of highs and lows, literally and figuratively. And it can be pretty hard at first, kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But eventually it gets so much easier, and you get to discover all the bells and whistles to having type 1, and you get to drink snacks and eat. You get to eat snacks in class, and I have met the most amazing people I've ever met because of diabetes. Look where I am now because of diabetes, and the people I've met, the things I've done, people I've met.
And also, I mean, if you're really high, drinking from a fire hose probably would be the worst thing because you're super thirsty. So it all kind of comes full circle. So I think that's a quality answer. And I just really appreciate both of you taking the time to answer one another's questions and questions from the chat, but we are past the hour mark. So I need to start closing things down. So I want to thank you both for being here this evening. And now I'm going to read our outro. Are you ready to say goodbye? Okay. So I'm going to jump into the formal goodbye for this evening's chat. So thanks to everyone at home for watching our program. And if you want to share it, if you like this recording, you can find it on the Children with Diabetes website. You can go to their Facebook, or you can go to the Tandem Diabetes Care Facebook page. April and Laila, thank you so much for being part of tonight's event and sharing your story with the CWD community. We really appreciate your time and you being so generous with it. It was a pleasure hanging out with both of you and seeing everybody enjoy what you guys were saying real time. Thanks again to everyone at home for tuning in and to our friends who might be catching this discussion from the CWD Video Vault. Thanks for tuning in there too. Make sure you share this video and like it and subscribe or whatever I'm supposed to say at the end of that sort of thing. And a big thank you to Tandem Diabetes Care for bringing together these two inspiring PWDs for tonight's discussion. And thank you at home again for joining us for tonight's Masterpiece Product Theater. Have a good night. It's a Zoom meeting, so everyone waves at the end. Bye. Thanks for being here. Good night.